Hey everyone, welcome back to the Npte podcast. This is Will Crane, your host. Thank you so much for joining me as we go through the content you need in order to dominate on test day. So today I've got a practice question for you. This is related to the integumentary system. I think you'll like that. Remember, the integumentary system, it is one of the largest other systems on the exam. So after cardio, musculo, and neuro, that's about 75% of the test. The integumentary system has somewhere between 8 and 11 questions. It is only rivaled by the system interactions section, which has between 8 and 10 questions. So Integ is certainly one of the larger other systems between 8 and 11 questions, and it does cover everything from examination to differential diagnosis to interventions. And just a reminder as well, those of you who are listening to the audio version of this podcast, if you want to read along, you want to see all of our content, be sure to check us out on YouTube and Instagram, where you can follow and find all of the video versions of these podcasts. If you're like me, I'm a very visual learner. I like to be able to see and not just hear it, but see it and really interact with the content. So be sure to check it out over on, like I say, Instagram or YouTube. That's where you'll have the best luck in finding all of our video content as well. So just one other thing as we get to our practice question, be sure to check out ptfinalexam.com/podcast for all of our freebies. We've got some pretty cool announcements coming your direction. Not the least of which is we'll be sending out some discounts to our subscribers related to our recent partnering with Summit Professional Education. It's a continuing education company with both in-person courses, live webinars, as well as pre-recorded continuing education credits. You can find all of that, and like I said, I'll be sending out lots of free stuff. That's one of the great things that I really enjoy about my job, is that I get to give away tons and tons of stuff. And so if you want all of our freebies, be sure to check it out, ptfinalexam.com/podcast, to be the first on the list there. So without further ado, let's dive into our practice question for today. As per usual, I will read to you the question, give you a moment to respond, and then we'll talk about it together. Here we go. For which of the following integumentary impairments will a transparent film dressing be most appropriate? For which of the following integumentary impairments will a transparent film dressing be most appropriate? 1. Arterial insufficiency ulcer. 2. Stage 2 pressure injury. 3. Neuropathic wound. Or 4. Venous insufficiency lesion. So again, for which of the following integumentary impairments will a transparent film dressing be most appropriate? 1. Arterial insufficiency ulcer. 2. Stage 2 pressure injury. 3. Neuropathic wound. Or 4. Venous insufficiency lesion. All right, so the correct answer here is that number 1, the arterial insufficiency ulcer. To answer this question really is 2 parts. Number 1, you have to know what in the world a transparent film dressing is. And then number 2 is what wound would it be best placed on? And so the first part, a transparent film dressing is a lot like plastic wrap. It has really no absorptive capability. It's typically placed on a wound with no exudate or very minimal exudate. It's really meant to trap in moisture for a very dry wound to try to help it to not be quite so dry anymore. So in the case of arterial insufficiency, these wounds typically do have an ischemic, almost necrotic look to them, because they, in fact, the O'Sullivan textbook describes it as a dry gangrene. Kind of an interesting description there, a dry gangrene. Say that 10 times fast. But arterial insufficiency, it's when there's insufficient arterial flow to the lower extremity, almost always lower extremity, that would result in degradation of the integumentary system. So you can develop these arterial insufficiency ulcers. They're almost always on the lateral side of the limb. They're typically cool, shiny. They're quite painful. They have an ischemic type pain to them. You'll see, again, a cool, shiny, and ischemic, ashen-looking leg is the classic appearance. And so with that arterial insufficiency ulcer, you'd find that there is very little exudate. Now, to promote autolytic debridement just means that the immune system, the body's immune system, is given a chance to take care of things on its own. You have to have a little bit of moisture for that. Plus, you've got to, in essence, let the body take care of itself. And so that's where the plastic or transparent film is placed on the wound. It holds in and retains any moisture that is there and permits autolytic debridement to occur. So I guess in my mind, I would always, almost always, I'm trying to think of an exception to this, but I'll just put the little asterisk. I'm sure there's an exception, but almost always put in your mind, transparent film is related to autolytic debridement and is usually used in very dry wounds. So in the case of like an arterial insufficiency ulcer, that would be the classic presentation or the classic use of a transparent film. Now, these other answer options, a stage 2 pressure injury typically has at least a moderate amount of exudate. It could have even more exudate, as pressure injuries tend to have pretty significant exudate. Same thing for venous insufficiency ulcers. The biggest difference there is that pressure injuries are related to bony prominences from pressure. So it doesn't always have to be a bony prominence. Could be from like a urinary catheter tube. Could be from something that the patient was lying on. But in any case, there is a direct correlation to pressure as well, pressure that creates the injury. Whereas venous insufficiency ulcers, these are related to poor venous return. So in a sense, you get good supply of blood to the lower extremity, but very poor return. And so all that extra fluid overload that's being pumped down into the leg tends to come out as exudate. So you get lots and lots of exudate with venous insufficiency ulcers. In both those cases, both pressure injuries and venous insufficiency ulcers, chances are you're going to need something with much more absorptive capacity, such as a foam or an alginate. And then finally, a neuropathic ulcer. You could make the argument that neuropathic ulcers, which are quite related to diabetes and possibly peripheral arterial disease, the biggest difference here is that neuropathic ulcers are always on weight-bearing surfaces of the foot on a bony prominence. So we're talking almost always metatarsal heads. You'll see it there all the time. So the neuropathic ulcer, while you could make the correlation and say, all right, it's an arterial insufficiency, would it not also benefit from a foam? The truth is that because it's on a weight-bearing surface of the foot, you have to pad it a bunch more in order to offload the wound. So like in my patient caseload, we'd always create these donut-shaped wound dressings around the wound. There was some absorptive capacity required because there was some exudate, but the biggest key is to offload that surface. And so a transparent film is just not going to do that. It's not going to accomplish your goal of controlling exudate. Plus, it's not going to meet your goal of offloading the wound surface. So it's, again, in the case that, I'm again trying to think of an exception to this rule. I think you'd find that neuropathic ulcers are going to require something a bit more foamy, something with foam or possibly gauze just for that padding, more so than for the absorptive capability. Although, again, hearkening back to some of my wound care experience there, it did seem like a lot of neuropathic ulcers did have at least a moderate amount of exudate. But the arterial insufficiency ulcer, that's the one where the transparent film is the clearest and best fit. Very good for for a wound that has very little exudate. And you could use autolytic debridement, so the body's immune system doing its own debridement. So there you go. Again, the correlation in my mind I would have is that arterial insufficiency ulcers are best treated with something like a transparent film. They have that cool, shiny, painful appearance. I guess all wounds have kind of a painful appearance. They are cool, shiny, and painful, and are very often on the lateral side of the leg. And because of their dryness and very little exudate, they would, again, best have a transparent film in order to, number one, hold in moisture, and number two, you can monitor the progress of the wound with that transparent film because it is indeed transparent, as the name implies. So there you go. I get these questions all the time from students about wound care and dressings that they felt like in school it was not a real strong suit for them. So I do have a ton of recorded material on this. I include that in all of our paid products, so all of our VIP class, all of our independent study course. So if you need a little bit more on wound care, definitely check those out. I think you'll really like that. All right, so with that, we'll bring it to a conclusion then. Again, thank you so much for taking the time to come and spend with me, and a big thank you. Thank you for your efforts. I know that as you're going through this process, it's a big pain. There's a lot going on in your life. You're very busy, but I just want to let you know that we're here for you every step of the way. I've got tons of freebies I want to give away to you, so check that out at ptfinalexam.com/podcast. We've got lots of stuff coming your direction. Some pretty fun announcements coming up in the coming weeks that, again, I think you won't want to miss. So check it out, ptfinalexam.com/podcast. And as always, if you haven't yet, please leave us a review wherever it is you're listening to this podcast. A lot of people are listening on Spotify these days. Seems like that's our biggest platform, followed by iTunes. So my iTunes users, if you want to outplay the Spotify folks, go for it. But in any case, or the Google Play users, whoever wants to, I'll let whoever wants to win there. But if you haven't yet, it only takes 1 second to go in and leave a review, a little 5-star review. I told this I think this in the last episode, but it still cracks me up. I had a student that I asked at CSM, I said, hey, have you they said, hey, I'm a big fan of the podcast, really appreciate it. I said, great. Hey, have you by chance left a review? It really means a lot. And he said, oh, yeah, I haven't yet, but let me write myself a note to write you a review later. And I said, it'll take longer to write the note than it will just to take the moment and go in and leave a 5-star review. And indeed, it took all of 2 seconds. And anyway, would very much appreciate it. So with that, we'll bring it to a conclusion. Will Crane, fist pumps all around. I'll see you all in the next one. Have a fabulous day, everyone. Talk to you soon.